Violence in video games is far from a new conversation, but it's something now that seems completely normalized. Back in the early days with pixelated gunfights, the industry started to wrestle with how far is too far. Movies, for example, were pushing the limit, but no one seemed to stop it unless it was getting to levels of Cannibal Holocaust. Digital brutality, however, was completely human-controlled. You controlled the violence, and the debate began on whether digital brutality carried any sort of moral weight. While countless games nowadays have engaged with violence, few did so as unapologetically and unflinchingly as 1997's Postal. There's many reasons Postal seems to live in people's brains. The music, the graphics, the gameplay. There's a lot of things that Postal did that no one had seen before. In 2016, Postal Redux attempted to repackage the experience for a modern audience, with improved visuals, an upgrade to Unreal Engine 4, updated mechanics, co-op, etc. I've only recently started playing this myself, and as a big fan of Postal 1, I have to say, Redux is incredibly fun. And if anyone had never played the original Postal, I'd actually recommend Redux over the original Postal game. But for some reason, I couldn't help but feel like I was missing something. I'm a big fan of the original Postal. I started playing Postal 1 and Postal 2 at age 13. Yeah, that's pretty damn young, I understand. But listen, back then these games were shrouded in mystery. You couldn't get them on Steam. They were sort of always appearing in these violent video game lists. And back in the days of the early internet, it was kinda hard to find. So what was it? What was it about Postal Redux that had me thinking that it just wasn't on the same line of Postal 1? The gameplay seemed to be better, it was snappier, there was more blood, you could see the visual clarity on what was going on, but there was just something missing from it. And then it hit me. Postal Redux, despite being a brilliant remake, ultimately highlights the shift in how we understand and confront violence in video games. I'm not going to sit here, and this video is not going to be a criticism of Postal Redux per se, but it is going to be highlighting something that Postal Redux fails to understand. Through its visual clarity, mechanical polish, and cultural context, Redux actually sanitizes the game that was never meant to be clean. You can't simply replicate the back-alley sadistic mystique that swamps this game. Postal 1 emerged in a landscape of virtual violence. Even now, Postal 1's brutal atmosphere is the element that games like Hatred fail to capture, and Redux seem to ignore. Before we can begin, however, we need to go back to 1997 and understand the landscape of violence that was sweeping throughout video games in that era.
Bring our children into this culture of carnage.
Our children can torture victims, rip out their hearts, and then wave the bloody debris above their heads.
Fatality.
See, it seems funny, especially if you weren't around in that era, but titles like Doom, Quake, Carmageddon, and Mortal Kombat were serious players in igniting the debate around interactive violence. One of the major players as well was Columbine, which we're eventually going to have to talk about if we want to understand the difference between Postal Redux and Postal. But the moral panic was already underway. Video games were still clawing towards mainstream legitimacy and were under siege by parents groups, religious groups, politicians especially, and sensationalist media outlets. See, this is the problem with Postal. If we follow this context, Doom, Quake, Carmageddon, Mortal Kombat, as well as other games that were popular, let's look at the enemies that were highlighted in these violent video games. Doom, 1993, you were fighting demons from hell, nothing much has changed. Wolfenstein 3D, you were fighting Nazi soldiers, Nazi dogs. Mortal Kombat, you were fighting martial artists from fantasy realms, so, you know, everyone's participating. Duke Nukem 3D, you were fighting aliens. Quake, you were fighting Lovecraftian monsters. Do you see the pattern here? So every single enemy in these games were Nazis, demons, basically things everybody hates. Fantastic, nice and easy, and still that was causing chaos. So imagine when Postal dropped. Let's take a look at the enemies of Postal. In Postal, your enemies are just people living in the neighborhood. Some shoot back, some don't. Your objective is to kill enough of them to progress. Cops, SWAT teams, civilians, military forces, but mostly unarmed bystanders just running around living their life. There's no invading alien force, unless you want to believe the conspiracy theory. There's no global war. There's no ancient prophecy. You're not saving the world. You are going insane and killing everyone. So this was a major line cross, right? There's no fantasy veil. This is real-life America. You're shooting up trailer parks, suburbs, towns, and eventually a school. Then of course with this came infamy. Postal was banned and heavily restricted in 14 countries. It was banned in countries like Australia, Germany, New Zealand, South Korea, China, Brazil, Singapore, Canada, and even saw restriction in the United States itself, the United Kingdom and France. Major stores like Walmart just would not stock it, which Running with Scissors actually used to promote the game.
I get under a lot of stress at work, and it's just kind of nice to go home and just get it out that way, and then I'm okay for the rest of the night.
All in all, it's clear that Postal was never just another edgy 90s shooter. It was a cultural hallmark. It was brutal, grounded, and the fear came from the fact it was disturbingly plausible. After all, it was based on the Postal shootings. The media labelled it a murder simulator, and politicians such as Senator Joe Lieberman held it up as evidence of the moral decay of youth culture. Yet in spite of this, or you could argue perhaps because of it, the notoriety, the fame, the game gained a cult following. The combination of its grim aesthetic, minimalistic storytelling, and raw execution gave Postal a mythic status of the game world. And yet when Postal Redux arrived, just short of 2 decades later, that myth was sort of shattered. The horror, the unease, and the cultural bite had all been smoothed out in favour of modern gameplay and visual polish. Again, not a negative, it's required for a Redux. But in order to fully understand why Redux lacks the effectiveness of the first, we seriously need to dive into the disconnect. How does Postal Redux, despite being a faithful remake on the surface, lose the soul of the original? More importantly, we'll explore the deeper question. Can fear, discomfort, and of course cultural transgression survive in an era where everything controversial is just rebranded and marketable? Redux is far from soulless, but there's 2 types of soul inhabiting the shell of both games respectively. One is rotten, gleaming with a forbidden horror. The other is flashy and masquerading, ready to provide a more louder thrill at the cost of its atmosphere. Honestly, the thing that I noticed immediately, you can spot the tone difference in the main menu. Postal 1's main menu is brutal. It starts up, it gives you no chance to breathe before you're smothered with this disgusting, grimy look into what we assume to be the demon's mind. The music is absolutely painful to listen to. It's basic, it's bare bones, but most of all, it's dead. And I think that term of death follows it. See, again, Postal Redux isn't doing anything wrong. It's a modernized version of Postal, but in that doing so, it's lost its edge. Postal Redux's main menu has the same music to a degree, but it's now higher quality, and overall it's just easier to look at. There's a deathly stillness juxtaposed with the screaming hell in the original. Again, it is a product of its time, but the rough and low quality artwork, the eerie shot of the protagonist blurred, and the tape holding the words Postal is very otherworldly. It's like something from the dark web. The audio, which in its choppiness pronounces the wails and screams, which seem muted in the Redux. This deathly stillness is something which seems to inhabit all of the original game. This is something that's lost in the Redux. The grim found footage nature of Postal 1, it makes it feel like it's a game you shouldn't be playing. It's got mystique to it. It feels like it was quickly assembled in a basement. So Postal Redux is essentially shining through with its modern flair, but there's a reason why Postal 1 feels so dark from the get-go. It's an immediate punch to the gut that you can't recover from. It sets the tone of menace and mental instability. Again, Postal Redux is disgusting, but it's a sleek and modern disgusting. The UI is clean, there's animation effects like the bullets spinning around, and the background artwork is very clear and easy to see. So as strange and as stupid as this statement will be, it's the fact it looks too professional, too clean, too well done, that is detracting from the original Postal's atmosphere. It feels clean, in a disgusting way. It's the professionality that takes away from the original Postal's atmosphere. That is where Postal Redux's primary problem comes from. Again, Postal 1 thrives on warping your imagination. It's like a nightmare. When stuff is high clarity, this causes issues for this sort of theme. The new artwork is absolutely stunning and fantastic, but that is where the problem starts to begin. You can see this heavily in the new loading screens. The loading screens in Postal were a glimpse into the demon's mind. What was he experiencing? How was he coping? One of the things I really respect Redux for was bringing in something that was hidden in the Postal manual. That is the journal. The journal in the original Postal highlights the dude, or the demon, depending on what you want to believe's ideas around humanity. The earth is hungry, its heart throbs and demands cleansing. The earth is also thirsty. These phrases stick in your brain and are true signs of horror. Redux also has these, but it incorporates something that was hidden in the manual. If you play Redux on harder difficulties, you get different journal entries that eventually become war diaries. Rather than someone going insane, you get a different slice of insanity. The loading screen tips turn into war journals, in which the dude, who you're playing as, believes that he's the only person who's normal. Everyone else is trying to kill him, and there's some sort of disease sweeping through the world. It's up to you on whether or not you believe him, but that's one of the main things I love about it. But the new loading screens in Postal Redux are polished and professionally rendered, but this ends up undermining the atmosphere that made the original so unsettling. Funnily enough, the professionalism is precisely the problem. It distances you from the raw, fragmented horror of the original loading screens. There's also some which had complete overhauls, which I think completely detach from the imaginative nature. The outskirts, for example, in Postal 1 is a spun, sickly view of a forest. Combined with the muffled voices in the background, it's a feeling akin to being in a state of disassociative episode. What looks to be a corpse lies buried roughly in the dirt, and the messed up nature of the images make it appear as if someone or something is lurking in the trees, warping into the wood. Your imagination runs absolutely wild. In the Redux, this has been changed to two dudes taking cover. Again, one can argue the reason for this lore-wise, and maybe it's hinting at the co-op mode, but I don't know, this seems to lose any mystique and really takes you out of the action. The original Postal loading screen for the mine, I also had the same feeling with it. It's far more terrifying precisely because of its low quality. Like, if I saw this image as a kid, I could have thought it was real. It's got that effect. It's accidental artistry. The grainy, degraded resolution gives the entire scene a warped, dreamlike quality. The demon lurks there, standing over a very realistic-looking body, and it's very, very jarring. It's as if you're trying to half-remember a nightmare. The jagged lighting, the distorted corpse, and the barely visible stretched figure in the shadows don't show you the horror directly, it just suggests it. And this suggestion makes your imagination go wild, and it's exactly why it sticks with you. It's that atmosphere. It plays on your imagination, and that's where the horror comes in. Your imagination will fill in the gap. By contrast, the modern reimagining is a high-definition, stylized, painted-esque texture. With carefully defined shadows, it looks more like a horror comic book panel than something breaking in real time. Granted, you could find it unsettled, but you're more admiring the art. It's beautifully done, and it tells you exactly what to see. But that's the problem. The fear is performative, it's curated. In the original, the horror just feels unintentional. It's like you find a corrupted image on a camera that you bought at a Goodwill. This one from the Easy mod also always spoke to me. Again, from what I see here, I see what looks like the image of a human, a skull. Multiple bullet holes line the back of the head, and all you see is a bloody, gory mess. Is this all the demon sees? Does he not see the person behind it, or does he just see a red outline? As for the remake, you see a... I don't even know what this is, it's just purple. Again, with the original loading screens, I feel like the low quality aesthetic and the accidental horror made your imagination go wild. Imagination is such a key, pivotal part of games which seems lost these days. I don't want to go into a complete rant about that, but lower poly graphics sometimes look better in your head when you remember them, because your brain had to use imagination to fill in the gaps. I'm sure you've had instances where you thought the game looked better as a kid. So to fully understand how imagination and context affect Postal and Postal Redux, we need to finally look at the gameplay. Let me just say this one more time to reiterate. Gameplay-wise, Redux is the clear winner, without a doubt. It's snappier, there's far more gameplay effects that make it easier to play, and it's far more satisfying. Despite this, however, Pixelated Carnage lies at the unique experience that's impossible to replicate with Redux. By nowadays, it's tame, but the game's visuals are key to the descent into that atmosphere. Postal 1's characters are low poly, its animations are stiff and erratic, and its violence plays out in ugly, unpredictable bursts. Gameplay mechanics, such as the crosshair, in which the colour slowly changes depending on how much more damage a person can withhold, is simply not in Postal 1. There's a sort of randomness to it, waiting for an enemy to keel over and eventually die. The violence is ugly and unpredictable. NPCs collapse in twitchy spasms, and blood is sparse but shockingly grotesque. It doesn't look cartoony, it looks real. Less really is more. I already mentioned the crosshair, but there's something else that stuck out to me. When you finish leveling Postal 1, that's it. No signs of life, no moaning. Just you, your actions, some dried blood, and maybe the odd corpse which is having a little attack in the corner. Redux has this too, but as soon as you complete your objective, there's a massive exit sign pointing towards your next mission. It ushers you and sort of reminds you of the gameplay element. Now, Postal 1 doesn't have this, both to its detriment and its success. It's detrimental because it can be confusing, but it's successful in aiding the atmosphere. To be honest, it was actually a mystery on how you progressed if you didn't own the manual. Once a mission is complete, so to speak, you press F1. This was actually such a common question on the forums, an achievement was even added to Postal 1, which I thought was really funny. I know it may sound like nitpicking, but honestly, this weird gameplay mechanic is critical to, again, the atmosphere. With the F1 key and a lack of direction after you've committed a massacre, it seems as if you're sort of jumping from memory to memory on a twisted roller coaster ride through the dude's mental state. If you've never played this before, then this mechanic, combined with the loading screen and the sick wonder of what place will become the next target, really does have a strange feeling. This once again cultivates in the elementary school mission, which we'll be talking about soon. But even still, satire is a sort of forgotten thing in Postal 1. While Postal 1 is often remembered for its grim tone and oppressive atmosphere, there are undeniably moments of absurdity. There's enemies like ostriches, the marching band, miners who wield dynamite, clowns, etc. It is an odd cartoonish world, but because of the low poly art style and lack of overt narrative framing, these elements don't really read as satire in the way that Postal 2 does, for example. Instead, they just feel more fragmented, like a fever dream. The thing is, it's still filtered through the lens of a crumbling psyche, giving you a rather sick humour. The blocky models and sparse animations actually force your brain to interpret what you're looking at. So while the ostriches are funny, and the miners would look out of place in some sort of cartoony game, you sort of just end up interpreting them differently, I find. In that ambiguity, the horror sort of remains intact. By contrast, Postal Redux's cleaner, high-resolution graphics expose the absurdity too clearly. There's a cartoony amount of blood after every stage. Some of the characters do look very silly. What was once unsettling because it was vague becomes silly because it's over-defined. When everything is visible and intentional, your imagination doesn't need to do most of the work anymore, and it's that loss of ambiguity that can break immersion in a game that thrives on being psychologically disorientating. And again, that's that key word here, imagination. Both in the gameplay, the loading screens, and even the main menu, Postal 1's older graphics and older atmosphere rely mostly on imagination to make it creepy. It's funny too, because despite the disturbing nature, it still throws you into a trance. One of the major differences between 1 and Redux, however, is the Rampage mode. Now, the Rampage mode is not a thing in Postal 1, but it's the highlight of Postal Redux. It's the first thing that appears when you boot the game up, and it seems to be encouraged through co-op and in the trailers. Redux mode is a score-based mode in which you kill as many people as you can to get the score up. More complicated kills mean higher scores, etc. All the while, the silence and the grim atmosphere has been replaced with pretty damn badass music, let's be fair. Regardless though, I feel like Rampage mode, for as fun as it is, completely misses the point of Postal. The gamification is very Advent here. The high scores, the loud music, the lack of ability to take in anything that you're doing. It puts you into a killer trance, but it's a killer trance with a game on it. Postal 1 has that killer trance, but it's a really sickly trance. As if you're forcing the Postal dude to do your bidding for you, and he doesn't really want to do it. If I ever make a follow-up video to this, I really want to talk about my own theory on what the game is, especially with the demon. TLDR, I think the demon is you. See, there's many controversy on whether the Postal dude is actually in control of his actions. Many fans point to the plot essentially showing that he's not. a demon instead is controlling it. Hell, in Postal 1, even one of the options is called Demon, which is just the voice of Postal Dude. The voice of Postal Dude as well is different to the voice that plays when he takes damage in Postal 1. But I'm getting besides myself. Regardless, Rampage mode is incredibly fun. But as you can see, this uber gamification has absolutely stomped on the previous one's atmosphere. We also need to talk about the infamous elementary school scene, the original ending of Postal 1. It's one of the most disturbing and debated moments in gaming that, even with the lower poly graphics, still instills a sense of fear and dread. And it's very hard for this to be recreated. The final level takes you to an elementary school. The dude or the demon or whoever, after spiraling further and further into violence, completely breaks. It's a cutscene, you don't control him, you're just watching. He enters the school grounds, he starts to twitch and starts to fire. But for some reason, the bullets seem to pass through the kids. They don't seem to react to him being there. He drops to his knees and gives out, with the screen fading to black, and the ending cutscene playing. There's many interpretations of what this ending means. Some argue it's a rare moment of guilt, clarity, some see it as symbolic. Me personally, I feel like it's the demon, us, losing control of its host. Again, maybe I should make a video on my theory about that. Whatever theory you believe, however, one thing is absolutely certain. The scene is still haunting. You never actually kill anyone. That's kind of what makes it worse. The dread does not come from the action, but from the implication of you almost doing so. Would you, the player, be able to do this? You probably wouldn't even think about it. The low poly graphics only amplify the discomfort. The children all look the same and don't react. The postal dude moves slowly, deliberately, then stops. But on top of that, the loading screen once again comes into play. This one just reads elementary school. It's like something from a creepypasta, to be honest with you. Your heart sort of sinks. If you've never seen this before, you don't know what's going to happen. And that moment of suspense is honestly one of the most chilling scenes in video game history. Now, in Postal Redux, the school scene was completely removed. There is some arguments on why, but the truth seems to be a bit more disturbing than initially thought. When Postal 1 released in 1997, the idea of a school shooting was shocking, an exaggerated nightmare. 2 years later, Columbine happened, the most prolific school shooting in American history. Video games, of course, were being targeted as the scapegoat for this incident, as opposed to looking into the various other factors that caused this, like mental health issues in schools. This grim ending from a nightmare had become a horrifying reality for many people. Running with Scissors made the call to remove the level from Redux, stating that they could no longer be shocking in the way it once was. The tragedy of Columbine and the many shootings that followed rendered the school level arguably not as provocative and as horrible as it once was. This horror from a nightmare had become a reality. In Redux, the school level is replaced by a churchyard burial scene. It's somber, moody, but doesn't have the same action or kick as the original. It doesn't hit the same way, and I can see why they added it. There is still that moral rupture, the abrupt realization of what happened, and there's many other theories on what it actually was. Some people saying it's actually the postal dude's kid who gets lowered into the grave, starting his absolute snap and descent into madness. Now, don't get me wrong, I can see why some people may argue that this wasn't the original reason. I mean, this game came out on Nintendo Switch for Christ's sake, and I can't imagine how hard it would be to get censorship to approve when you've got a level in which Postal Dude collapses near a school. Again, I need to qualify, you don't actually kill anyone in the school level, but people will just jump to conclusions upon seeing school inside a game in which you kill civilians. I feel like it fits the modern narrative better in Redux, but it does lose the emotional violence that Postal 1 forces you to sit with. Again, I really can't get seeing that loading screen out of my head for the first time. Even now, it's still shocking. So some fans have speculated about the ulterior motives, console approval and public image, but I don't really think that matters. In fact, it's that post-contextual knowledge of Columbine that followed shortly after, which makes it even more disturbing. You had a brief glimpse, a brief period in which this was just a horrendous nightmare that now became a reality, and continues to be a reality. Again, I don't want to comment on whether or not this was a good idea to remove it. Personally, I do think it should have remained in the Redux. When we step back, Postal 1's jagged gameplay, unsettling loading screens, low poly violence, and the infamous ending, it was clear this game wasn't designed to entertain in the traditional sense, but that was the point. The stiff animations, the minimalist HUD, the raw audio, all of it created a space where horror didn't come from what was shown, but from what was suggested. Your imagination is doing 90% of the work with Postal, and that is what is missing from Redux. In contrast, Postal Redux, for its visual upgrades and tight controls, loses that sense of dread. It plays better, it looks better, and it is better in a mechanical sense. It won't haunt you the way the original does. The higher resolution, the smoother animations, the rampage mode, they remove ambiguity. They close the space between you and the game, and in doing so, they leave no room for the mind to wander or to fester. Postal 1 is terrifying not because of what it says, but because of what it leaves unsaid. It was a game that existed in a very specific cultural moment, where fiction still held mirror to horrors we hadn't seen yet in real life. Now that mirror has unfortunately cracked. So while Redux may carry the same name and layout, it reflects a very different world. We're used to virtual violence and gore, it's not shocking. But even still, chaos and violence is not mysterious, it's not speculative. In my opinion, this is why Postal 1 has that atmosphere, that aura around it that makes it truly terrifying compared to Redux. So if you find yourself questioning, what am I missing here when you play Redux, and then you find it in Postal 1, hopefully this video has assisted you in putting it into words. Its imagination, its cultural violence, and its atmosphere. To conclude, I want to ask the question, could Postal Redux have ever carried the same sense of dread and psychological weight as the original? After thinking about this for a while, chatting with friends who also played the same game, and looking at the script over and over, I've came to this conclusion. Technically, yes, Redux could have carried a similar sense of dread and discomfort. Culturally, probably not. Look, there's ways Redux could have embraced the horror at the core of Postal 1. It could have maintained the rawness, maybe kept the sound design, the jagged UI, the twitchy animations, maybe make it feel a bit more otherworldly, not as bright and not as graphically in-depth. It also could have doubled down a bit more on the psychological unraveling of the dude, warping loading screens further, maybe having different degrading journal entries into coherence, the odd sound effect here and there of the demon speaking to you, and letting the game itself feel like it was breaking down around you. It could have resisted the polish, so to speak, while staying stylized and not going too cinematic. As I've said, it could have even kept the school level, not for shock, but more for commentary as a sort of chilling relic. When I think about this, I think something along the lines of Hotline Miami meeting Jacob's Ladder. A surreal descent into madness, abstract and brutal, kind of similar to what Postal Brain Damage did, but without the quirky satire. But this is where the limit kicks in. We're in a different world now. Grotesque violence that shocked in 1997 is a daily news cycle and a new video game. School shootings aren't unspeakable fiction. They're real and they're reoccurring. Postal was edgy and subversive because it came from a time where the game industry was still finding its place. After all, you had people complaining about Mortal Kombat and Doom, which these days just doesn't seem to bat an eyelid. Today, that sort of video gaming voice is very filtered through corporate sensitivity. It's not the Wild West anymore that games were, which really promoted freedom. When Hatred came out, for example, it missed the bar by going too edgy. Now, Hatred is a fine game, I don't think it's technically wrong, but it's so stupid. It just didn't shock. Granted, you had the initial outrage of it, but because of how satirical it was and how over the top it was, it ended up doing some sort of weird feedback loop where Hatred said absolutely nothing, and just seemed to come across more of a knockoff of Postal. It was even more of a parody of it. Modern violent games definitely lean into satire or surrealism to sort of soften the impact, but Postal 1 doesn't do that. It's uncomfortable, it's raw, and it's very, very sincere. Postal 1 was a product of its time. All those little engines, that artwork, that gameplay design, it was all something stuck to 97. It was lightning in a bottle, really, when it came to fear and horror. Redux, no matter how faithful or refined, could never feel as dangerous or subversive. So to answer the question, could Postal Redux recapture the feel of the original? I think it could have went somewhere different with it, a different style of commentary, but it chose to play it safe and just be a sort of up-res of the original. But all in all, that's exactly why Postal Redux does not feel like Postal 1. That's exactly why Postal 1 has that sense of fear and dread that constantly lingers in the atmosphere. So to put bluntly, could Postal Redux ever recapture the fear of the original? The answer's quite simple. It's no. Fear like that could only happen at a specific point in time with specific tools at a specific cultural hallmark. Fear like that only happens once. So if the polished remake has dulled the edges, if the horror is too blatant and your imagination's been subdued, if the nightmares just aren't hitting the same anymore, that's when you know it's time to go Postal.